After 8 years of marriage, my husband left me with divorce papers. "You're no longer the wife I need," he said coldly. 1 week later, he married a gorgeous woman with family wealth. Then he called in panic. Their newborn baby looked nothing like either of them. She was my estranged stepsister. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. Go ahead and get comfortable. Pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea. What I'm about to share with you, it's a long story. It's not just something that happened overnight. It's the story of how my life, a life I spent 8 years carefully, lovingly building, was demolished in the span of a single weekend. But it's also the story of what I found in the wreckage, what I rebuilt from the ashes. It's a story about betrayal so deep it takes your breath away, about secrets so dark they curdle your blood, and about how the ugliest truths have a way of clawing their way into the light, whether you want them to or not. It all started on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our year. June 12th. It was my 8th wedding anniversary, and it was also my husband Preston's 36th birthday. I remember the feeling of that day so clearly. It was a Tuesday, bright and sunny, and I was filled with a nervous, hopeful energy. I'd decided to take a half-day off from my job as an accounting assistant, a small act of rebellion against my usually rigid schedule. I needed everything to be perfect. Our marriage had felt distant lately. The silences between us had grown longer, filled with unspoken things. I thought a perfect evening, a gesture of pure love and effort, could be the bridge back to each other. My first stop was the wine shop. Not just any shop, but a little boutique place clear across town that Preston loved. It was a 30-minute drive with traffic, but they were the only ones who carried this specific red wine, a Cabernet from a small, family-owned vineyard in Napa that we had visited on our honeymoon. The bottle felt heavy and significant in my hands, a tangible piece of our shared history. Next, I went to the specialty butcher shop, the kind with sawdust on the floor and butchers who know your name. I bought a beautiful cut of Wagyu short ribs, marbled and rich. The price made my eyes water a little, but I pushed the thought away. This was for him. This was for us. I'm not a gourmet cook by any means. My skills are more in the realm of comforting, simple meals. But I had found a complicated recipe online, one that involved a slow braise and a long list of ingredients, and I was determined to master it for this one night. Back home, our small apartment, which had lately felt quiet and a bit lonely, was suddenly buzzing with my purpose. I put on some music, a soft jazz station, and got to work. I strung up those tiny, delicate fairy lights around the frame of our balcony door, the ones that cast a soft, golden glow that made everything look magical. I went into the linen closet and pulled out our best tablecloth, a heavy ivory linen we only used for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I spent 10 minutes just smoothing out the wrinkles. I polished our silverware until it gleamed and arranged it perfectly on either side of our best plates. In the fridge, a custom cake from our favorite bakery was waiting. It wasn't large or extravagant. It was simple, elegant, with smooth vanilla frosting and a small message piped in delicate chocolate script on top, to Preston, happy birthday and anniversary. It was a testament to quiet love, not grand gestures. By 7 o'clock, I was ready. The short ribs were simmering on the stove, filling the apartment with a rich, savory aroma. The table was set for a king. I'd showered and changed into a simple black dress he'd once said he liked, dabbed a little perfume behind my ears. I poured myself a small glass of wine, sat down at our perfectly set dining table, and I waited. The knot of hopeful energy in my chest was fluttering. I believed he would walk through that door any minute, see the effort, and his face would light up. I believed this night would change things. 8 o'clock came and went. The sun had fully set, and the city lights began to twinkle to life outside our window. I got up and lit the candles, their warm flames dancing in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls. The apartment was beautiful, romantic, and achingly empty. At 9 o'clock, the hope began to curdle into anxiety. I checked my phone for the 20th time. Nothing. I sent him a simple text, trying to keep my tone light. I'm waiting. The food smells amazing. I added a little smiley face, a desperate attempt to feign a cheerfulness I no longer felt. The message delivered. But there was no reply. At 9:30, the knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. This was no longer just him running late. This was something else. I called his phone. It rang once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times, each ring echoing in the silent apartment, a shrill countdown to my disappointment. Then, it clicked over to his voicemail. His cheerful, professional voice filled my ear. You've reached Preston James. I can't get to the phone right now. I hung up before he could finish. I didn't leave a message. What was there to say? Where are you? I've made you a perfect dinner for our anniversary, and you've just forgotten? It sounded pathetic, even in my own head. At exactly 10:35 p.m., my phone finally buzzed. For a heartbeat, relief washed over me. But it wasn't a call. It wasn't even a text. It was an email. The subject line was empty. The message itself was brutally short, stripped of all warmth or personality. Sorry, big client emergency. Have to stay at the office. We'll make it up later. That was it. Not even a sign-off with his name. No happy anniversary. No thank you. Not an ounce of regret. It was the kind of email you'd send to a colleague to cancel a lunch meeting, not to your wife of 8 years on her anniversary. I set the phone down on the table, my hand strangely numb. The words seemed to burn on the screen, a digital tombstone for the evening I had so carefully planned. The candles had burned down, leaving little pools of hardened wax like frozen tears on the tablecloth. The cake, with its hopeful message, was still untouched in the fridge. I stood up, my legs feeling stiff. I was still holding the folded linen napkin I'd prepared for him. I looked around the empty, beautifully decorated room, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt nothing at all. It was a hollow, echoing emptiness. I didn't cry. I think some part of me was past crying. Some part of me understood that this was more than just a ruined dinner. This was an ending. That night, I methodically dismantled the evening. I blew out the last of the candle smoke, the wisp of gray disappearing into the air like my hope. I spooned the expensive, untouched short ribs into a plastic container and stored it in the freezer. I took down the fairy lights, winding them carefully around my hand. I cleared the table, wiped it clean, and folded the ivory tablecloth, placing it back in the closet. There was no one to celebrate with. I finally lay down around midnight, still wearing the wrinkled black dress. I tried to sleep, but the image of that short, cold email kept slicing across my mind. It wasn't the first time Preston had come home late. But this time, it was different. It was a quiet, creeping instinct, a cold breeze down my spine telling me this wasn't just a late night. This was a goodbye. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the apartment was a physical presence. It pressed in on me, amplifying the hollow ache in my chest. And in that heavy silence, my mind did what it always does when I feel abandoned, it drifted back. Back to another time I'd felt this profoundly, foundation-shatteringly alone. It was the summer after my sophomore year of college. I was home, but the house didn't feel like home anymore. It had been less than a year since my mother's funeral, and the grief was still a raw, open wound. Her scent still lingered in the closets, her favorite book was still on the nightstand. I was stumbling through my days in a fog, feeling her absence in every room, every quiet moment. My dad, well, he was grieving in his own way. A way I couldn't understand or accept. He was all about moving forward, about not dwelling on the past. One sweltering afternoon in July, he called me into the living room. He was sitting on the sofa, a nervous sort of brightness in his eyes that set my teeth on edge. Audrey, he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. I have some wonderful news. Barbara and I are getting married. Barbara was the woman he'd started dating just 4 months after Mom died. I remember the words not making sense at first. They felt like a foreign language. Married? I finally managed to say, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Dad, it hasn't even been a year. Mom's clothes are still in the closet. Life is for the living, sweetie, he'd said, that cheerful, awful phrase that felt like a slap in the face. Your mother would want me to be happy. He told me Barbara was a widow too, that she understood loss. He told me she had a daughter of her own, a teenager. He painted this picture of a new, blended family, a chance to be whole again. But all I could see was him erasing my mother, papering over our family with a new one. I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend to be happy. I attended the small wedding in a beige dress, feeling like a ghost. I was polite to my new stepmother, but there was a wall of ice between us. And her daughter, Genevieve, she was a footnote in the entire affair. A quiet, sullen-looking girl a few years younger than me, with a mouthful of braces and a face full of teenage acne. She seemed as miserable to be there as I was. We exchanged maybe 3 words the entire day. After that, I kept my distance. I used college as my excuse. I rarely came home for holidays. When I did, the visits were brief and awkward. My stepmother and I would make stilted small talk in the kitchen. And Genevieve was hardly ever there. She was always away at some boarding school, or at a friend's house, or on a trip. Or so I was told. In the entire decade my dad was married to her mother, I think I saw my stepsister maybe 3 or 4 times, and always in passing. A quick hello in the hallway. An awkward nod across the dinner table. We were complete strangers, connected only by our parents' marriage certificate. She was a ghost in the background of my fractured family. That distance, it cost me my relationship with my dad. We drifted apart, our calls becoming less frequent, more superficial. But it was a price I was willing to pay. I poured all my energy, all my hope for what a family could be, into Preston. I had met him my senior year of college. He was handsome, ambitious, charming. He became my rock, my future, the solid foundation on which I would build a new family, one of my own choosing. And now, lying in our bed, in the quiet apartment that was supposed to be our sanctuary, I felt that foundation cracking, turning to dust beneath me. The same chilling feeling of abandonment I'd felt in my dad's living room all those years ago was creeping back in, cold and brutally familiar. I had run from one broken home, only to find myself sitting in the rubble of another. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck and a heart that felt like a lead weight in my chest. I showered, dressed, and drove to work, moving through the motions like a robot. The world outside my car window seemed muted, the colors washed out. All morning, I stared at my computer screen, but the numbers and spreadsheets just swam in front of my eyes. I kept checking my phone, which lay silent and dark on my desk. Not a single message from Preston. No apology, no explanation. Just a vast, deafening silence. Around noon, the gnawing unease in my stomach became too much to bear. I couldn't just sit there and wait. I needed an answer. I walked out into the hallway, my heart starting to pound, and I called Preston's office landline. Brenda, the cheerful receptionist with the sing-song voice, answered on the second ring. Good morning, Sterling Financial, Brenda speaking. Hi Brenda, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's Audrey, Preston's wife. I was hoping I could speak with him for just a moment. There was a noticeable pause on the other end. A tiny hesitation, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Oh, Audrey, she said, her cheerful tone immediately dissolving into one of cautious sympathy. Can you hold on just one moment for me? The line went quiet, replaced by horrible hold music. A minute passed, then 2. It felt like an eternity. I could hear my own ragged breathing in the quiet hallway. Finally, she came back on the line, her voice much softer now, laced with pity. Audrey? I'm so sorry. Preston doesn't work here anymore. His last day was Friday. Friday? I repeated, the word feeling foreign. What are you talking about? His last day was 3 days ago? Yes, she said gently. He put in his resignation 2 weeks ago. He said he was relocating for a new opportunity. I'm sorry, he didn't leave any forwarding information. I stood frozen in the hallway of my own office building, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The world tilted on its axis. He had resigned 2 weeks ago. He had been lying to me every single day for 2 weeks. Coming home, complaining about his boss, talking about projects he wasn't even working on. The whole time, he was planning his escape. And I, his wife, the person who was supposed to know him better than anyone, was the very last to know. I don't remember saying goodbye to Brenda. I don't remember walking back to my desk or telling my boss I had a family emergency. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and street signs that I didn't see. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Every turn of the wheel felt like bracing against a rising tide of panic and betrayal. I fumbled with my keys at the apartment door, my hands shaking too much to fit the key in the lock. Finally, it clicked open. I pushed the door open to our third-floor apartment, the place that had once felt like my haven, now thick with a suffocating, treacherous silence. My eyes immediately fell on the shoe rack by the door. There was a glaring empty space in the second row. Preston's favorite brown leather dress shoes were gone. His running sneakers were gone. Preston! I called out, my voice high and thin, echoing in the stillness. No response. I hurried down the short hallway to our bedroom, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. And then I saw him. He was there. He was standing in the middle of the room, next to an open, expensive-looking suitcase on our bed. He was calmly folding a brand-new, navy wool suit and placing it inside. A sleek leather duffel bag on the floor was already filled with new clothes, a new silk tie still in its wrapper, and a pair of gleaming black dress shoes with the price tag still on them. These were not the clothes of the man I knew. This was the wardrobe of a stranger. He wasn't just leaving, he was upgrading. He was starting over. What are you doing? I asked. The words came out as barely a whisper, all the air having been punched out of my lungs. Preston looked up from his meticulous folding. His expression was one I had never seen before. It wasn't love, or guilt, or even sadness. It was a flat, cold annoyance, as if my presence was an inconvenient interruption to his schedule. You're back, he said, his voice level. He then turned back to his packing as if I wasn't even there. I took a shaky step closer, my mind struggling to catch up to the reality unfolding in front of me. Where are you going, Preston? Next state over, he said casually, not looking at me. He smoothed a wrinkle from a freshly laundered shirt. I've accepted a new job in Albuquerque. Albuquerque? The name of the city sounded like it was from another planet. You quit your job. You didn't say a word to me. You found a new one in another state? When were you going to tell me? Or were you just going to disappear? He didn't answer my questions. He just continued his methodical packing. His silence was more brutal than any shouting match could have been. Instead of answering, he reached into his new leather briefcase, which was sitting on the dresser, and pulled out a slim manila folder. He placed it on the dresser between us with a quiet, definitive thud. He opened it. The first page was stark white, with cold, black letters at the top. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. I stood there, motionless, staring at the words. Preston, what is this? What is happening? He finally stopped packing and looked at me. His eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me with so much love on our wedding day, were now as cold and hard as steel. It's exactly what it looks like, Audrey, he said. You're no longer the wife I need. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I literally staggered back a step. What are you talking about? The wife you need? And then he began his indictment. He listed my supposed failures like a prosecutor reading a long list of charges, his voice detached and cruel. You always put your job first. You're always tired. The house is dusty half the time. You only cook real meals on the weekends. You don't care about my needs anymore. You don't care about me. I gripped the edge of the dresser, the sharp corner digging into my palm. That's not true, I choked out, the words getting caught in my throat. I tried, Preston. I tried so hard. You come home late every night saying you already ate dinner with a client. So I stopped cooking. I clean the house, and you tell me not to touch your desk because it messes up your system. You haven't asked me about my day in months. The distance, it came from you, not me. Don't bring up petty things, he snapped, his voice finally showing a flicker of emotion, irritation. You just make excuses. A real wife, a supportive wife, doesn't need reminders to take care of her husband and her home. A bitter, broken laugh escaped my lips. A real wife? You talk like I sit around all day long. I have a career, Preston. I work 40 hours a week. I pay half the rent. I pay for the electricity, the water, the internet. All of it. But no one cooks dinner for me when I get home exhausted. No one asks me if I'm okay. And I never, ever complained about it because I thought we were a team. Preston's jaw tightened. That was your choice to martyr yourself. I've made my choice now. He zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet room. He walked to the door, grabbing his duffel bag. I've already rented an apartment near my new job. I start next week. Do not get in my way. My body moved on pure, desperate instinct. I stepped in front of the bedroom door, blocking his exit. That's it? I pleaded, tears finally blurring my vision. After 8 years of marriage? This is how it ends. With a list of complaints and a suitcase full of new clothes? No apology? No real explanation for this betrayal? He looked down at me, his face a mask of cold indifference. I don't owe you anything, Audrey, he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, not in a comforting way, but to physically move me aside. He brushed past me, shouldering the door open without a single look back. The front door of the apartment clicked shut behind him. The sound was so final, so cold. It was like the slam of a courtroom gavel, declaring my life as I knew it officially over. I sank to the floor, my legs giving out from under me. I was still clutching the divorce papers, the sharp edges of the paper digging into my skin. And I just sat there, on the floor of my empty bedroom, surrounded by the ruins of my marriage. The days that followed were a thick, gray fog of disbelief and logistics. 2 days after Preston walked out, I received a certified letter. It was from the building management office. It formally notified me that our lease, which was in both our names, was being terminated at the end of the month, as per the request of one of the leaseholders. Preston had filed the paperwork the day he left. He had made me homeless without even the courtesy of a phone call. That night, a strange, cold anger began to cut through my grief. It was the sheer, calculated brutality of his departure that finally started to wake me up. I began to go through our apartment, not with sadness, but with a grim sense of purpose. I opened the file cabinet where we kept all our important documents. I found the receipts and bank statements for all our major purchases. The sofa, the brand new fridge we'd bought last year, the dining table, the memory foam mattress we slept on, almost everything of value was under my name, paid for from my personal bank account over the years. I had been the financially responsible one, the one who managed our budget. The only things he had ever really paid for were his car and his expensive clothes. He had left like a stranger, taking only what was his, erasing himself from the space. Everything was still there, except the marriage itself. I hired a lawyer for the divorce. A kind, no-nonsense woman named Helen who looked at me over her glasses and said, "Honey, we're going to get you through this." I didn't sign the papers right away. They sat on my coffee table for a week, a constant, silent accusation. The task of packing was soul-crushing. Every object held a memory. A silly souvenir from a vacation. A coffee mug he'd given me. I packed it all into boxes, taping up sections of my life and labeling them in black marker. One afternoon, while cleaning out the office closet, I found a box of old photo albums. I sat on the floor and opened one. There we were, younger, smiling, on a trip to the coast. He had his arm around me, and we looked so happy, so full of hope. A wave of grief so powerful it felt like a physical blow washed over me, and I just sat there and cried, ugly, gasping sobs, for the man I thought I had married and the future I had lost. That Saturday night, my phone buzzed with a notification from an old high school friends group. It was our 18-year reunion, being held at a craft brewery downtown. My first instinct was to ignore it. The thought of facing a crowd of people, of having to plaster a smile on my face and answer the inevitable question, "How's Preston?" felt like a fresh form of torture. I almost didn't go. I was sitting on my sofa, surrounded by cardboard boxes, wearing the same sweatpants I'd had on for 2 days. But then I caught a glimpse of myself in the dark screen of the TV. I looked tired, defeated. And a spark of defiance flickered to life inside me. I was not going to let him turn me into this pathetic creature. I got up, took a long, hot shower, and got dressed. A simple black dress, a swipe of wine-colored lipstick. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just needed to remind myself that I was still Audrey. I was still strong enough to walk into a crowded room without flinching. The brewery was loud, a chaotic symphony of laughter and shouted greetings. For a moment, I hovered by the door, feeling out of place. Then, a familiar voice called my name. "Audrey? Is that you?" I turned. It was Sterling, a guy who used to play bass in our high school's terrible garage band. He had a bit of stubble now and a kind, settled look in his warm eyes. He smiled, handing me a beer. "Still the last one to show up, huh?" The conversation was surprisingly easy. We sat at a small table in the back, away from the worst of the noise. He told me he'd been divorced for 3 years and was raising his 6-year-old daughter alone. He spoke about it with a quiet, straightforward honesty, no bitterness or drama. When he asked about Preston, I kept my answer simple. "We're getting divorced." I must have had a look on my face, because I added, "No pity, please." Sterling just gave a small, understanding nod and immediately changed the subject, asking me about my job instead. I was so quietly, profoundly grateful for that. For the first time in weeks, I felt like a person again, not just a victim in a sad story. Talking to him, I felt a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a life for me on the other side of all this pain. A few weeks passed in a whirlwind of packing, paperwork, and planning. My lawyer, Helen, handled everything with Preston's lawyer. The process was cold, efficient, and impersonal. It was clear Preston wanted it done as quickly as humanly possible, and I was too exhausted to fight. I just wanted it to be over. I found a new, smaller apartment across town, a 1-bedroom with a little balcony that got good morning sun. It was a fresh start. Exactly 1 week after the judge's signature on the final decree made our divorce official, I was sitting on the floor of my new living room, surrounded by boxes, when an email notification popped up on my phone. It was from Preston. My stomach instantly clenched. The subject line held just one, chilling word: proof. My finger hovered over the screen. Every instinct screamed at me to delete it, to not let him pull me back into his vortex of cruelty. But a darker, more powerful curiosity won out. I had to know. I tapped the screen. The email was short, but a photo was attached. Before I could even read the words, the image jumped out at me, crisp and professional. It was a marriage certificate, the fancy, calligraphed kind you get for framing. It was stamped in deep, official-looking red ink at the bottom. Bernalillo County, New Mexico. Groom, Preston Robert James. Bride, Genevieve Ellis Whitmore. The date of registration was printed clearly, just one day after our divorce had been finalized. My mind struggled to process the information. The speed of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just moved on, he had his next life lined up and ready to launch the second he was legally free of me. Before I could even fully absorb the bride's name, my phone started ringing. It was him. He had timed it perfectly, sending the email and then calling immediately, wanting to be there, verbally, to twist the knife. I answered, my heart a block of ice in my chest. Hello? Preston's voice came through the speaker, and it was a sound I had never heard from him before. It was dripping with a triumphant, gloating satisfaction. You saw it, right? I wanted to make sure you got the proof. I'm a married man again. Life's never been better, Audrey. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just listened, the sound of his voice making my skin crawl. Her name's Genevieve, he went on, savoring every syllable. She's 36, just like you, but that's where the comparison ends. She's mature, she's gentle, and, he paused for dramatic effect, letting the cruelty hang in the air, she's so beautiful you'd be jealous. I remained silent, focusing on my breathing. In and out. She's the only daughter of the family that owns the Whitmore real estate chain in Santa Fe. You know, Whitmore Properties? They're huge. Her parents are wonderful people. They absolutely adore me. They even built us a small house near the Southern Hills as a wedding gift. Can you believe it? And my new job? Executive Vice President at her family's company. It's a significant promotion for me. The salary is, well, you wouldn't believe it. He talked about her family's wealth, her potential inheritance, as if they were his own personal achievements. So that's why you needed the divorce so quickly, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. Not entirely, he replied smoothly, the lie coming so easily to him. I just couldn't keep living with a woman who always put work first and neglected her role as a wife. I needed a real partner. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh into the phone. And my new wife, he continued, his voice swelling with pride. She doesn't have to work. She chooses to take care of our home. To take care of me. That's what a real family is about. Then came the final, brutal blow, the one he had clearly saved for last. Oh, and one more thing. We're expecting a baby girl, Preston said smugly. Genevieve is already 3 months pregnant. The math was simple and ugly. He had been having an affair for months. The baby was conceived while we were still married, while I was at home cooking his dinners and waiting for him to come home. I hung up the phone without another word. I sat there on the floor, the silence of my new apartment pressing in on me. Genevieve Ellis Whitmore. The name echoed in my head. Genevieve. Why did that sound so damn familiar? I sat on the floor of my new apartment for a long time, just staring at the wall. The name, Genevieve, kept circling in my mind. It wasn't a common name like Sarah or Jessica. It felt like a key to a lock I couldn't find, a half-forgotten memory that was just out of reach. It was the Ellis that was really bothering me. Genevieve Ellis Whitmore. On a desperate hunch, I crawled over to my laptop, which was sitting on a stack of books. I opened it and went to Facebook. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed her full name into the search bar. Her profile came up almost instantly. It was public. The profile photo showed a stunningly beautiful woman. She had soft, expertly highlighted blonde waves, sharp blue eyes accentuated by perfect makeup, and a dazzlingly white smile that could probably sell toothpaste to millions. She looked polished, wealthy, and utterly perfect. She looked nothing like anyone I had ever known. I started scrolling through her public posts, feeling like a detective in my own life's tragedy. The pictures painted a portrait of a charmed life: charity galas where she posed in designer gowns, ski trips to Aspen, casual lunches at chic cafes, art gallery openings. And then, about 10 or 12 photos down, I froze. It was a picture of her standing next to a much older woman, both of them smiling warmly for the camera. The woman was elegantly dressed, but I knew her face instantly. I would have recognized her anywhere. It was my stepmother, Barbara. The caption beneath the photo read, "So happy to be celebrating my amazing mom's birthday today. Love you." The air rushed out of my lungs. My entire body went cold. It was like plunging into icy water. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just fall into place, they slammed together with the force of a car crash. Genevieve. My father's stepdaughter. The sullen, awkward girl with the mouth full of braces and the face full of teenage acne. My stepsister. It couldn't be. The woman in these photos was a goddess, a completely different person. The girl I vaguely remembered was plain. Scrawny, with mousy brown hair, squinty eyes, and a slightly crooked tooth that she always seemed to be hiding behind her hand. No way. It had to be a crazy, impossible coincidence. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone and called Sheridan. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" she asked cheerfully. "Sheridan," I said, my voice trembling. "I need you to do something for me. And you have to promise not to freak out." "Okay," she said, her tone instantly turning serious. "You're scaring me, Audrey." "What is it?" "Preston's new wife. Her name is Genevieve Ellis Whitmore. Can you look her up on Facebook? Tell me if you recognize her." "Genevieve who? From your dad's wedding all those years ago?" "No way," she said, but I could hear her typing in the background. "Okay, I've got her profile." "Wow. She's gorgeous. Looks like a model. Definitely not the girl I remember." "Look closer, Sherry. Please." There was a long silence on the other end of the line as she presumably scrolled through the photos. I held my breath. "Oh my God," Sheridan finally whispered. "There's a picture of her with your stepmom." "Audrey." "Oh my God. That's her." "It can't be," I insisted, even though I knew in my gut it was true. "She looks nothing like that." "People change, Audrey. Especially when their family has Whitmore Properties money," Sheridan said, her voice a mix of shock and disgust. "I remember hearing a rumor years ago from my cousin who went to college with her. They said she moved to New York for a few years and completely reinvented herself. She got a nose job, her jawline done, veneers, everything. She basically bought a new face." My mind was reeling, struggling to connect the two images, the awkward girl in my memory and the flawless woman on my screen. I pulled up the wedding photo Preston had so cruelly sent me. I zoomed in, past the perfect makeup and the brilliant white smile. And then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of her head when she smiled. A familiar glint of insecurity in her eyes that no amount of surgery could erase. It was her. The full, monstrous reality of the situation crashed down on me. My husband hadn't just left me for another woman. He had been carrying on an affair with my estranged stepsister. A woman who had literally carved a new identity for herself. And Preston, in his desperate, pathetic climb up the social ladder, had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. He had married a complete and total fabrication. And the most bitterly ironic part of it all? He was so blinded by her beauty and her family's money that he had absolutely no idea. He didn't even recognize her. Several months went by. The shock of the discovery slowly hardened into a cold, quiet resolve. I didn't tell anyone else, not even my lawyer. This secret was a loaded gun, and I kept it tucked away, unsure if or when I would ever use it. I focused on my new life. I unpacked my boxes. I hung pictures on the walls of my new apartment. I started my art class. I slowly, painstakingly, began to put myself back together. I didn't hear a word from Preston or his new family. And I was profoundly grateful for the silence. I was healing. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening in late October, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a New Mexico area code. My heart gave a little jolt. I almost didn't answer it. But a cold, calm voice in the back of my head said, "Pick it up." So I did. "Hello? Audrey?" It was Preston. But his voice was completely unrecognizable. The smug, triumphant tone was gone. In its place was a raw, naked panic that was so thick I could feel it through the phone. "Genevieve gave birth," he said immediately, the words tumbling out of him in a rush. "It was last night. A baby girl." I heard him swallow hard, a dry, rasping sound. There was a pause, and then he continued, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "Audrey, something's wrong. She doesn't look like me. And she doesn't look like Genevieve. Actually," he stammered, his breath catching, "she doesn't look like either of us." I sat down heavily in my armchair, the phone pressed to my ear. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The irony was so thick, so darkly hilarious, I had to press my lips together to stop myself from laughing out loud. "Well, genetics are a funny thing, Preston," I offered, my voice as light and airy as I could make it. "Maybe she takes after a grandparent, or a great-aunt." "No, I thought that too," he said desperately, his voice rising in pitch. "I've been looking at family albums all day. She doesn't look like anyone. But Audrey, I keep thinking about that phone call. The day I told you I got married. You laughed. It was a strange laugh. You knew something then, didn't you? You knew something about her. I've been driving myself crazy thinking about it." I leaned back in my chair, a slight, cold smirk touching my lips. "I just found it interesting," I replied, savoring his desperation. "Stop joking with me," he practically shouted. "This isn't funny. I did a DNA test. I had it rushed. The results came back this afternoon. The baby is mine. I'm her father. But I still don't get it. Why doesn't she look like us? I haven't told Genevieve or her parents about the test, but they see it too. Everyone sees it. You're the only one I can talk to." You laughed like you knew something. "Please, Audrey, just tell me what you know." I let him stew in his own panic for a few more seconds. Then, I gave a quiet, low chuckle. My voice was calm, steady, and sharp as a shard of glass. "Preston," I said slowly. "Do you still have your old high school graduation album?" There was a confused silence on his end. "What? What does that have to do with anything?" I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "I found it while I was packing up the old apartment. It was buried at the bottom of your desk drawer, covered in dust. I was curious, so I opened it. And I was stunned when I found your senior picture." I let the pause hang in the air. I described the photo I had seen of him. A curly-haired boy with squinty eyes, crooked teeth, and skin covered in acne. "It took me a few minutes to realize it was you." "You were digging through my private things?" he asked, a hint of his old arrogant irritation returning. "No, Preston," I emphasized, my voice like ice. "I was cleaning out the apartment you forced me out of. I always wondered why in 8 years you never introduced me to a single one of your old college friends. Why you insisted on a tiny wedding with no friends from your past. Now I understand. You didn't just move on from your past. You tried to erase it. And so did Genevieve. I could hear his sharp, sudden intake of breath. He finally understood. You both changed because you wanted to live new, shiny lives, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. But you both forgot one simple, biological truth. Genetics can't be altered by a surgeon's knife. If you're still listening to me now, please, do me a small favor and like this video, and just comment the number 1 down below. It lets me know you gave me a like, and it tells me that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support means more than you know. It gives me the strength to keep going. After I said that, a long, heavy, crushing silence stretched out between us. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Preston's head, the horror finally dawning on him as he connected the impossible dots. He wasn't just dealing with a genetic mystery, he was dealing with the consequences of 2 lifetimes of deception. You think the baby, she's going to look like that old version of me? His voice was a thin, fragile thread, choked with a terror that was deeply satisfying to hear. No one knows for sure, Preston, I said, my voice as cold and clinical as a surgeon's. But she will carry what is real in both of you. Your blood, your DNA. The features you paid a plastic surgeon to shave away and the ones Genevieve paid to have completely rebuilt. You can't escape your own biology. Your daughter is a living, breathing testament to everything you've both tried so hard to erase. He let out a sound that was half a sob, half a strangled gasp. It was the sound of a man whose perfectly constructed world was crumbling into dust around him. What about Genevieve? I asked, my final, cutting question. How is the new mother handling this? He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was broken. She cried, he said, the words cracking. At first she just said she was exhausted from the labor, that she was having trouble bonding. But it's worse now, Audrey. She won't hold the baby. She won't even look at her for more than a few seconds. Every time she looks at that tiny, innocent child's face, she turns away. I can see the disgust in her eyes. Yesterday, her mom, my mother-in-law, had to come over and feed the baby and change her diaper because Genevieve refused to even touch her. She stays in her room all day. She says the baby looks like a stranger. A bitter, heavy sadness rose in my chest. Not for him. Not for her. But for that innocent child, born into a world of illusion, already rejected by the very people who brought her into it, simply because she was a living, breathing reminder of the pasts they had paid so much money to escape. She was their secret, made flesh. I took a deep breath and lowered my voice. You once stood in our bedroom and told me I had failed as a wife because I wasn't willing to sacrifice enough for you. But the ones rejecting their most fundamental roles, the roles of parents, are you and her. You don't need advice from me, Preston. I have none to give. I just hope, for that little girl's sake, that you don't project your own shame and cowardice onto her. She didn't do anything wrong. She just told the truth without saying a word. I ended the call before he could reply. Then, with a strange sense of finality and peace, I opened my contacts, found his number, and pressed block. There was nothing more I ever needed to hear from him again. My chapter with Preston James was finally, completely, blessedly over. Nearly a full year passed after that final, dramatic conversation. The memory of Preston's presence in my life began to fade, not because I was actively trying to forget, but because the new, quiet, authentic life I was building simply didn't have room for him. It filled every empty space he had left behind. I came to truly love my small apartment. It wasn't a showpiece like the home we'd shared, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft sage green. My little balcony, which got the best morning sun, was now overflowing with pots of herbs, basil, rosemary, mint. The simple act of watering them in the morning, of smelling the fresh, earthy scents, brought me a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. Mornings were no longer something to dread. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and sit on my balcony, watching the world wake up. I could finally just breathe. The air felt cleaner, lighter. I kept my job at the accounting firm, but I had a long talk with my boss. I explained that I was restructuring my life to prioritize my well-being. He was surprisingly understanding. I arranged to reduce my hours, shifting to a 4-day work week. It meant less money, but what I gained in time and peace of mind was invaluable. I chose a life of balance instead of burnout, a life where my own happiness was the bottom line. I was no longer chasing a version of success that someone else had defined for me. On my Fridays off, I went to my art class. It was a small community class held in a bright, airy studio. At first, I was nervous. I hadn't painted since I was a teenager. But the moment I put a brush to canvas, something inside me unlocked. I lost myself for hours in colors and textures, creating something just for the joy of creating it. It was messy and wonderful. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I had let drift away during my marriage because Preston had found them unimpressive. And I started spending more time with Sterling, the kind friend I had reconnected with at the reunion. Our friendship grew slowly, organically, like one of my balcony herbs. There were no grand romantic gestures, no promises or expectations. Just quiet afternoons walking his dog in the park, trying out new coffee shops, and sharing simple meals. We talked about everything and nothing. He and his delightful 6-year-old daughter would sometimes come over for pizza and a movie night. The sound of a child's happy, infectious laughter would fill my quiet apartment, and it was the most beautiful sound in the world. It wasn't a dramatic, passionate romance. It was better. It was real. It was a life. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt completely, authentically mine. I no longer checked up on Preston or Genevieve. Their world of high-stakes drama and suffocating deception felt like it was on another planet. But life has a strange, almost comical way of updating you about the people who have stepped out of it, whether you want an update or not. One early autumn afternoon, about 1.5 years after that last phone call, I was on the phone with Sheridan, catching up. We were laughing about a terrible movie we had both seen when her tone suddenly shifted. "Oh, you are not going to believe what I heard," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You haven't heard anything about Preston, have you?" "No," I said, a flicker of morbid curiosity stirring. "And I haven't tried to." "Well," she said, drawing out the word. "My cousin's best friend is a paralegal at one of the top family law firms downtown. And guess who has a consultation meeting there next week? Genevieve Whitmore." I raised an eyebrow, but I wasn't surprised. "She's filing for divorce?" "That's the word," Sheridan confirmed. Apparently, Preston cheated again. He had an affair with a new hire at his wife's company, a 20-something assistant. Genevieve found out 3 months ago but tried to keep it quiet for the sake of appearances and for the child. But I guess she's finally had enough. She paused. "But Audrey, it gets so much worse." "How could it possibly get worse?" I asked. "My other friend, Jessica, her son is in the same preschool class as their daughter. She sent me a screenshot from their class parent group chat. It's just heartbreaking." She sent the image to me. I opened it and read the message from a concerned mother. The message read, "Just a heads up to be aware of what the kids are saying. There's a new girl in class, and my daughter says some of the other children are being incredibly mean to her. Apparently, they somehow found out her mother had extensive plastic surgery, and they've been teasing the poor little girl, saying things like, 'Your mom used to be ugly, and you look just like her old face.' The teacher said the poor thing cried all week and has started refusing to come to school." I stared at the message on my phone, and my heart just sank. It was a real, physical ache in my chest. Even though I felt nothing but contempt for Preston and Genevieve, the thought of their innocent child being bullied, of her being forced to carry the shame of her parents' choices, it broke something in me. It was a profound sadness mixed with a helpless anger. "Genevieve regrets ever having the baby," Sheridan added quietly, her voice full of pity. Jessica said the gossip among the preschool moms is that Genevieve is cold and distant with the child. She thought the baby would be her beautiful little doll, a perfect accessory for her perfect life, inheriting her post-surgery beauty. But it's obvious the girl carries the original genes from both sides of the family. She's a constant, living reminder of the faces they both spent a fortune to get rid of. The girl is basically their past, walking around in a pink dress. I said nothing. Because honestly, what was there left to say? Preston and Genevieve had chosen a life wrapped in glitter, a life built on a foundation of illusions, illusions of beauty, of status, of control. But in the end, the very things they couldn't hide, their pasts, their true natures, and the cruel, selfish way they treated other people, was what showed up the clearest when they had a child. Their lie had created a legacy of its own, and their daughter was the one paying the inheritance tax, with interest. I hung up with Sheridan and walked over to my balcony. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. Down below, in the park, I could see a father pushing his daughter on a swing. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair flying in the wind. A simple, beautiful, honest moment. My life now had no major drama, no shocking twists, no boardroom titles or gifted houses. But it had rhythm. It had peace. It had autonomy. It had the quiet joy of a well-tended herb garden and the easy laughter of a true friend. It had a fullness I once thought I'd never touch again. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still reflect on the entirety of what I've been through. The 8 years of a quiet, lonely marriage. The sudden, brutal divorce. The shameless betrayal and the unmasking of a lie that was so bizarre it felt like something out of a movie. For a long time, there was a deep well of bitterness in me. But now, standing on my own balcony, in my own peaceful life, I realize I no longer feel it. What I feel instead, strangely enough, is gratitude. Gratitude because that complete and utter collapse of my old life gave me the chance to be reborn. Not into someone new and shiny, but back into myself. The real me, the one who had been buried under years of compromises, of avoiding conflict, of pretending to be okay when I wasn't. The me who loves to paint, who enjoys a quiet morning, who is worthy of a love that is gentle and real. If anyone ever asked me whether I've forgiven Preston, I would probably smile and say, that's the wrong question. It's not about him anymore. I don't need to forgive him to be free. I just need to live true to myself. And for the first time in my adult life, I can say that without a single shred of hesitation. I found freedom, I found peace, and I found my true self, something no amount of money or cosmetic surgery could ever buy. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was a long one, and it wasn't easy to tell. If any part of this resonated with you, or if you've ever had to find your own strength after a betrayal, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your stories give me strength, too. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Remember, no matter what you're going through, you are not alone. Thank you for being here with me today.